The fog hadn't burned off yet when I got to the tarmac, and that turned out to matter, because fog changes the way sound travels. Every voice out there that morning sounded closer than it was. 6:34 a.m. San Francisco International, the private aviation terminal on the north side, the one with the glass doors that always stick a little in the cold. I remember the exact time because I looked at my watch twice, first out of habit and then because some part of me already understood I might want to remember it later. I had a carry-on in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other, still too hot to drink properly, and I was walking toward a Gulfstream that I had been on 11 times before. I knew which seat had the good reading light. I knew the pilot's name was Marcus and that he liked to talk about his daughter's soccer team if you gave him the opening. I knew none of that was going to matter in about 90 seconds. There were 8 of them standing near the base of the stairs. Luminary's senior team, the people who'd flown with us before, the people who knew me well enough to nod good morning. Every one of them found something else to look at when they saw me coming. The fog, their phones, the tread pattern on the tarmac. Nobody looked at me directly, which is its own kind of message if you've spent enough years reading rooms for a living. Helena was already inside. I could see her through the oval window in the second row, her hair pulled back tight the way she wore it on days she needed people to take her seriously. Days she'd once joked were her "don't test me" days. She didn't stand up. She didn't come to the window. She said something to the woman next to her and looked down at a folder in her lap like the folder had suddenly become the most urgent thing in her life. That was when Tiffany came down the stairs instead. She was 26, sharp blazer, hair perfect despite the hour, an iPad clutched to her chest like a shield. She had the expression of someone who'd rehearsed this in a mirror on the drive over. The corners of her mouth arranged into something meant to look like sympathy but landing closer to discomfort. "Mr. Voss," she said it carefully, like my name itself might be fragile. "Helena wanted me to let you know that this trip is for core company stakeholders only." She said the guest list needed to be streamlined. I stood there with my bag in one hand and my coffee steaming in the other, and for a second I genuinely thought I'd misheard her over the sound of the engines starting to spool. "She said family only?" I asked, not because I needed clarification, because I wanted to hear her say it again, to see if the second version matched the first. Tiffany blinked. She said core stakeholders. "I'm sorry, Mr. Voss. Here's what nobody tells you about a moment like that. You expect it to feel like something. You expect your chest to tighten, your face to go hot, some flood of adrenaline that makes your hands shake. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter than that, and colder, and in some ways worse. Every unnecessary thought in my head just went silent, one after another, like someone walking through a house switching off lights, until there was only one thought left standing in the dark. Helena had just made the single biggest mistake of her career. She simply didn't know it yet. I didn't say anything else to Tiffany. There was nothing to say to Tiffany. She was 26 and doing what she'd been told to do, and some distant part of me actually felt sorry for her. Standing there delivering a message she clearly understood was cruel. I looked past her, past the 8 employees still studying the fog, up at that oval window one more time. Helena still hadn't looked up from the folder. I lifted the coffee cup slightly, like a small salute to no one in particular, and took a slow sip. It had cooled just enough to drink. Then I smiled, not at Tiffany, not at the plane, just a private, quiet smile that belonged entirely to me, and turned around. Behind me, I heard the stairs begin to retract. The engines climbed half a register. Nobody called my name. I walked back across the tarmac at exactly the pace I'd walked out on it, unhurried, my bag rolling steady behind me, and I didn't look back once, not because I was too proud to, but because I didn't need to see it to know exactly what it looked like. By the time I reached the terminal doors, I could hear the Gulfstream's engines hit full power behind me. By the time I found a table near the window with a clear view of the runway, I had my laptop open, and by the time that jet lifted off the tarmac and banked west over the bay, carrying my wife 11,000 feet above a company that did not exist without me, I had already logged into the one system on Earth that still, entirely and legally, belonged to no one but me. My name is Cassian Voss. I'm 46 years old, and for most of my adult life I've been the kind of person who fixes things nobody else can see are broken. I met Helena 11 years ago at a tech conference in downtown San Francisco. In a beige hotel ballroom with bad coffee and worse lighting. She was up on stage pitching a boutique digital agency she'd built from nothing over 3 years, called Luminary Group, and I remember thinking 2 things at once. The first was that she was the most naturally magnetic person I'd ever watched speak in public. The second was that her back-end infrastructure had a hole in it big enough to sink the whole company. I asked her about it afterward. She didn't get defensive, which told me everything I needed to know about her. She just tilted her head, studied me like I was a puzzle she hadn't expected to find in that room, and said, "Buy me a coffee and explain it slower." 3 hours later, the ballroom was empty and we were still at that corner table. Helena was brilliant. I want to say that plainly, because nothing that happened later changes it. She had an instinct for people that I've never had and never will. She could walk into a room of strangers and by the time she walked out, every one of them felt like she'd been thinking about them all week. Luminary was hers, her hustle, her relationships, her vision. I never once disputed that, not then and not now. What Helena didn't have was the plumbing. When we started dating, the agency was pulling in about $3.5 million a year, held together by a patchwork of software that didn't talk to itself. Spreadsheets bridging to project tools bridging to invoicing systems that all lived in their own separate universes. Helena spent more of her week fighting fires than doing the work she was actually gifted at. 18 months in, she asked me, carefully, almost shyly, if I'd take a look. "Not run anything," she said. "Just look, tell me what you see." What I saw was a company one bad week away from losing a client through nothing but bad plumbing. So I built her a system. I called it, only ever in my own head, the Luminary Operating System. It never had an official name because I never once invoiced for it. I built it from the ground up, onboarding, project tracking, billing, resourcing, reporting, all of it living inside one purpose-built platform instead of 5 disconnected ones. Nights and weekends at first. Then, after we married and I stepped back from my own consulting work for what I told myself would be 1 year, full-time. That year became 3. By the time it was finished, the platform did things Helena's competitors were paying 6 figures a year for enterprise software to almost do. It gave her real-time visibility into every client account. It cut a 2-day monthly billing cycle down to an afternoon. It generated performance reports in minutes that used to take her team the better part of a workday. And because I'd built the security architecture to meet enterprise compliance standards from day one, it did something none of us fully understood the size of yet. It made Luminary look, on paper, like a company far bigger than it was. That was how we landed Meridian Financial, a $9 million, 3-year contract, the kind of deal that changes the trajectory of a company overnight. Their procurement team ran a full technical audit before they'd sign anything, and their head of security told Helena, in the room, that the architecture was the deciding factor, the reason they'd chosen Luminary over 3 competitors twice its size. Helena called me the second she got back to her car. I could barely understand her, she was laughing so hard. "They loved the system, Cass. They loved it, we got the deal." We celebrated that Friday at Cotagna, the good table by the window. The wine Helena only ordered when something was worth remembering. She stood up halfway through dinner, glass in hand, and gave a toast to her team, to Renata for closing logistics, to the account managers, to everyone who'd sat across the table from Meridian and sold them the vision. She didn't mention the system. I don't think it was intentional. I want to be fair about that. I think in that moment, surrounded by people who'd shown up in suits and PowerPoints, the platform simply wasn't in the room the way I was, quiet. Off to the side, raising my glass along with everyone else. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself the work speaks for itself, that I've never needed my name on anything to know what I built. I didn't know yet that in a company like Luminary, the things that never get mentioned are the things that eventually get forgotten belong to anyone at all. The next 4 years, Luminary Group didn't just grow, it transformed, from a $3.5 million boutique agency into a firm pulling just over $40 million a year. With new offices opening in Los Angeles and then Austin, each launch marked by a press release with Helena's photo above the fold and my name nowhere in it. I told myself that was fine. I was the plumbing. Plumbing doesn't get its photo taken. Somewhere in that stretch, Helena hired a chief operating officer named Renata Bishop. I remember the first time I met her, in our kitchen of all places. Helena had invited her over for what was supposed to be a casual welcome dinner. Renata was maybe 38, precise in the way expensive tailoring is precise, and she had a habit of looking at you for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable before she answered a question, like she was deciding how much of the truth you'd earned. She shook my hand, said something polite about the wine, and then spent the rest of the evening talking to Helena about growth targets like I wasn't in the room. I didn't think much of it at the time. Some people just don't do small talk with spouses. I've never held that against anyone. What I started noticing, over the months that followed, was smaller than that. harder to name, meetings that used to happen at the house, at the kitchen island, over coffee before Helena left for the office, started happening somewhere else instead. Calendar invites I used to be copied on, technical reviews, security walkthroughs, platform roadmap discussions, started arriving without me. Not cancelled, just quietly rerouted, the way water finds a new channel without ever announcing it's changed course. I asked Helena about it once, lightly, the way you ask about something you're not yet ready to call a problem. Renata's been pulling in outside consultants to review the platform, I said. Anyone loop me in on that? Helena didn't look up from her laptop. It's just due diligence stuff, Cass. Standard practice before we scale. You don't need to be in every meeting. I didn't need to be in every meeting. That was true. I told myself that was true for a long time. Then the acquisition talk started. A firm out of Seattle, Nexus Partners, had been circling Luminary for months, and by the spring it had gone from casual interest to something with lawyers attached. Nexus wanted the client roster, the revenue trajectory, and above all, they wanted the platform, the thing that had let a boutique agency punch so far above its weight that a Fortune 500 company had chosen it over 3 larger competitors. Their due diligence team spent 2 full weeks embedded with Renata, going through everything. Systems, contracts, architecture. I wasn't in a single one of those meetings. I remember standing outside Renata's glass-walled office on a Tuesday afternoon, ostensibly there to drop off a signed document for Helena, and catching a glimpse through the glass of 6 people around a conference table, laptops open, a slide up on the screen behind them that read Luminary Proprietary Technology, Overview. My architecture, my diagrams, in fact, the exact ones I'd built for the Meridian audit 2 years earlier. Still carrying my file naming conventions in the corner if you knew what to look for. Renata was standing at the head of the table, walking the Nexus team through it slide by slide. She saw me through the glass. She didn't wave me in. She held my eyes for that same extra second she always did, then turned back to the room and kept talking. I asked Helena about it that night. Renata was walking Nexus through the platform architecture today. Word for word, some of it looked like it was pulled straight from my compliance brief. It's better if we keep the technical discussions internal for now, Helena said, not quite meeting my eyes either. You know how these things go. I didn't know how these things went. Not like that, not when internal apparently didn't include the person who'd written every line of the thing they were discussing. That was the week I started paying closer attention. Not confronting anyone, not yet. Just watching, noticing which invites came to my inbox and which ones didn't. Noticing how Renata's name started appearing in places mine used to be. On internal documentation, on the org chart Helena had redesigned for the Nexus data room, on a slide deck I found open on the shared drive one night that listed key technical personnel, and simply didn't include me at all. It was a Thursday night, late, when I found the calendar invite. I wasn't looking for it. I'd logged into the shared admin console to push a routine security patch, something I still did quietly, without asking permission, because I'd never actually been told to stop. And there it was, sitting in the master calendar feed, a meeting scheduled for the following Monday. Nexus Data Room Walkthrough, Platform IP Transfer Discussion. Attendees, Helena Voss, Renata Bishop, Douglas from Nexus Legal, Luminaries Outside Counsel. My name wasn't on it, but the meeting was about me. 3 months before that morning on the tarmac, Helena came home with a folder I wasn't expecting, and set it down on the kitchen island like it was nothing, like it was a takeout menu. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the one night we usually cooked together, and I had salmon on the counter, half seasoned, when she walked in still in her blazer and slid the folder across the marble toward me. I need you to sign this, she said. Tonight, if you can. My lawyer wants it back by Friday. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it. It took me exactly 1 paragraph to understand what I was looking at, and about 4 more to fully absorb it. A reassignment agreement. In the clean, bloodless language lawyers use for things that are anything but bloodless, it stated that any software, systems, tools, or intellectual property developed by me for the benefit of Luminary Group would be formally and permanently assigned to the company. In exchange, 1 payment. $250,000. I read it a second time, standing at the island, the salmon forgotten, the evening light coming in gold and low off the bay behind Helena's shoulder, the garden she'd spent 2 years perfecting just visible through the window. Everything around is so calm and so ordinary that the paper in my hand felt like it belonged to someone else's life. This is a buyout, I said. It's a formalization. Helena said it fast, like she'd rehearsed it. Nexus needs clean IP documentation before they'll move forward. The lawyers said we need this signed. Helena, I set the folder down carefully, the way you set down something you don't trust yourself to hold. This platform generated a $9 million contract. It's the reason Nexus is circling us at all. And you want me to sign it away for $250,000. It's standard for IP developed during a marriage while a spouse is informally supporting the business. Her voice had gone flat, reciting. That's what my lawyer says the number should be. Your lawyer. I let that sit in the air for a second. Not our lawyer. Your lawyer. She didn't answer that. She looked at the folder instead of at me, which told me more than anything she could have said. 3 years, Helena. 3 years of my life, full-time, no salary, so you could scale this company past $40 million, and the offer is $250,000 and a signature by Friday. It's not about what it's worth to you personally, Cass. It's about what Nexus needs on paper to close the deal. It's my platform, my code, my architecture. There is no version of this where what it's worth to me isn't the most relevant number in that room. For the first time since she'd walked in, Helena actually looked at me. And for 1 second, just one, I saw something underneath the composure, something that might have been guilt, or might have just been the calculation of a woman doing the math on how this conversation could still go her way. I'm not trying to take anything from you, she said quietly. I'm trying to close a deal that's going to change both our lives. Both our lives, I repeated. Funny, I haven't been in a single meeting about it. She didn't have an answer for that either. I looked down at the document again. $250,000, sitting on the page in the same clean font as every other line, like it was a fair number, like it wasn't an insult dressed up in legal formatting. I thought about every Sunday morning server call, every 2 a.m. fix, every technical brief I'd written with my name nowhere on the cover page because I'd never once thought I needed it there. I need to think about it, I said. Helena nodded, not the nod of someone waiting to hear my thoughts. The nod of someone who'd already filed the outcome away as settled. Already moved 3 steps ahead to whatever came after my signature, a nod that had nothing left in it to negotiate with. I didn't sign that night. I didn't sign it the next night either. But something shifted in the house after that folder hit the island, something I couldn't name right away and didn't need to. The kitchen felt a few degrees colder every evening after that, in a way that had nothing to do with the fog rolling in off the bay, and everything to do with the fact that for the first time in 11 years, I understood exactly how replaceable my wife believed me to be. The house was quiet by 11, the way a house gets quiet when someone in it has stopped pretending to sleep. Helena had a red eye to Austin the next morning, early meetings with Renata, something about final vendor sign-off she hadn't elaborated on and I hadn't asked about. I told her I was staying up to finish a client deliverable. That part was true, it just wasn't the only thing I was finishing. I sat down at my desk in the office at the back of the house. The one that used to be a guest room before Helena decided we didn't need to host anyone anymore, and I logged into the platform's core admin console using credentials that, as far as I knew, still belonged to exactly one person on Earth. I want to explain something about the system I built, because it matters for what happened next. I hadn't touched the deep architecture in over a year, not because I'd lost interest, but because it had been running clean, and clean systems don't need their creator hovering over them. So when I logged in that night, it wasn't to fix anything. It was because a small, persistent itch had been building in me for weeks, ever since that folder hit the kitchen island, and I finally let myself scratch it. I started in the access logs, admin logins, API calls, anything touching the core repository over the last 6 months. The list scrolled past slowly, timestamp after timestamp, most of it exactly what I expected, my own logins from a year ago, a handful of automated system processes. The occasional flagged login from our finance coordinator pulling billing reports. And then, buried in April, a pattern that didn't belong. A set of read-only credentials, provisioned under Renata's authorization, granting access to a third-party IP address I didn't recognize. Not unusual on its own, outside consultants got scoped access sometimes, that was normal due diligence. What wasn't normal was the volume. Whoever was on the other end of that IP address had pulled, cloned, and exported entire modules of source code. Not glanced at, not reviewed, copied. I traced the IP to a registered business domain. Clear Path Solutions, a development firm out of Austin I'd never heard Helena or Renata mention once, not at a dinner, not in a meeting, not in passing. My hands went still on the keyboard for a second. Then I kept going. I pulled up their public-facing job postings, still cached from a search a few weeks earlier, a senior backend developer role, description language that was almost embarrassingly specific. Experience with proprietary agency management platforms, client onboarding automation, custom reporting engines. It read like a job description written by someone staring directly at my architecture and describing it back to me in slightly different words. Then I found the repository itself. It wasn't hidden, not really. Whoever had set it up hadn't expected the original author to come looking, which told me something about how confident they were that I never would. A private staging environment, still under construction, 3 modules fully built out, a 4th in progress. I opened the codebase and started reading. They were good. I want to be fair about that, because pretending otherwise wouldn't be honest. Whoever ClearPath had put on this had real talent. But talent isn't the same as understanding, and within 20 minutes I could see exactly where the seams were. Entire functions lifted structurally from my original code, variable names changed, comments stripped out, my initials scrubbed from every file header, except in one place. Buried 3 folders deep in a legacy utility file nobody had thought to touch, where a single line of my original documentation had survived the copy-paste. My name, still sitting there in a code comment from 3 years earlier, like a fingerprint someone had forgotten to wipe off the one surface they never thought to check. I sat back in my chair. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Helena's alarm go off for her early flight, then shut off almost immediately. She was already awake. Already moving. I closed the laptop halfway, heart going harder than I wanted to admit, and for one long second I was certain I'd hear her footsteps in the hallway, certain she'd walk in and ask what I was working on at midnight with that particular look on my face. She didn't. The footsteps went the other way, toward the bathroom, toward her suitcase, toward a morning that had nothing to do with me. I opened the laptop back up. The last thing I checked was the project timeline, buried in ClearPath's internal task tracker, which they hadn't bothered to lock down nearly as carefully as their code. A milestone chart. Phase 3, nearly complete. Phase 4, final integration testing, scheduled to close out in 21 days. 3 weeks. They were 3 weeks from a full rebuild of everything I'd spent 3 years creating, close enough to done that once it crossed the finish line, nobody in that data room would need to ask who Cassian Voss was, or why his name belonged anywhere near the platform that had built their company. I sat there in the dark a long time after that, the cursor blinking on an empty document, and for the first time since that folder had landed on the kitchen island, I understood exactly how much time I actually had left to decide what I was going to do about it. The terminal was quiet in the way airports get quiet after a wave of departures clears out, just the low hum of the concourse and the smell of burnt coffee from the kiosk behind me. I had a table by the window, a clear line of sight to the runway. And 11 minutes, that was the number I'd landed on the night I found ClearPath's timeline. Not a plan built in a panic on a tarmac, but one I'd already mapped out days earlier, refined and rechecked, waiting only for a moment I hoped would never actually come. 11 minutes was how long it would take Helena's jet to reach cruising altitude and lose its in-flight connectivity window. The moment when any last-second call from her to Renata, or Renata to the ClearPath team, would drop straight to voicemail. I opened my laptop and started the clock. First, the API credentials. My custom reporting engine had 3 integration points feeding data into the systems ClearPath had spent 4 months rebuilding, and I revoked all 3, one after another, watching each authorization key go from active to expired in real time. Somewhere in an office on the other side of the city, an automated alert would already be firing into a Slack channel nobody was watching yet, because it was 8:14 in the morning and most of Luminary's team hadn't finished their first coffee. Second, the encryption keys. 3 security modules, the ones I'd designed personally and never fully documented outside my own head, the ones the enterprise compliance audit had specifically flagged as critical infrastructure. I rotated them methodically, the way I'd rotate them during any routine maintenance window, except this time there was no one on the other end expecting the change, no ticket filed, no warning issued. Third, the authentication framework. This was the one that mattered most. The backbone linking every client-facing portal to the data behind it. I didn't delete it. I didn't destroy a single line of code. I simply removed my architecture's handshake with the rest of the system, the way you'd pull one load-bearing beam out of a house that was otherwise still standing, still looking exactly the same from the outside, until the moment someone tried to walk through the front door and found it wouldn't open. 8:19 a.m. somewhere over the coastline, Helena's jet would be leveling off. And somewhere in Luminary's downtown office, I imagined the first login attempt failing on someone's screen, then a second, a junior account manager assuming it was Wi-Fi, refreshing the page, getting nothing. 8:21 a.m. I imagined Patricia Chen, the CFO, pulling up the billing dashboard for a routine morning check and getting a blank white error screen instead of numbers. I imagined her picking up her phone and calling IT, and IT having absolutely nothing to tell her, because there was no IT ticket for what was happening. There was no incident, there was just silence, spreading outward through a system that had never once gone dark in 3 years of operation. 8:23 a.m. I hit the final command. The platform went offline, not partially, not one module, one office, one function. All of it: client onboarding, billing, resource allocation, the reporting engine that had one Meridian Financial, the entire operational skeleton of a $40 million company, gone dark in the space of about 90 seconds. Exactly the way a house goes dark when the one person who understands its wiring finally, deliberately, flips the breaker. I closed the laptop halfway and looked out at the runway. Helena's jet was long past the horizon by then, a small silver shape somewhere over the Pacific that I couldn't actually see anymore, just something I pictured, climbing steadily through clear air toward Los Angeles, carrying a woman who had no idea yet that the company waiting for her on the other end had just stopped functioning. I ordered another coffee. I watched a father wrangle 2 kids and an oversized stroller toward a gate 3 rows down. I let the ordinary rhythm of the terminal wash back over me: boarding calls, rolling suitcases, a toddler somewhere laughing at nothing in particular, while 11,000 feet in the air and 40 miles inland at the same time, in 2 completely different rooms, the exact same fact was starting to dawn on 2 different women. The system was down, and whatever came next wasn't going to be quiet. Helena landed in Los Angeles to a phone that wouldn't stop ringing in a company that had gone dark in the space of a single flight. She called me 4 times before I picked up, and when I finally did, I could hear it in her voice immediately, not panic exactly, but something close to it, something she was working very hard to keep contained. "The system is down," she said. "No hello. The whole platform, Cassian. We have the Meridian review in 6 hours and nobody can pull a single report." "I know," I said. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind of silence you can actually feel pressing against your ear. "What do you mean you know?" "I mean I took it down. I'm the one who did it." She didn't say anything for a long moment. I could hear the ambient noise of wherever she'd landed, footsteps, an announcement over a PA system, the ordinary sound of an airport that had no idea it was standing in the middle of the worst morning of someone's career. "You did this on purpose. Your company spent 4 months building a replacement for my platform using my own architecture, without my knowledge, while trying to buy the original out from under me for $250,000. I'd say I ran out of other options." Her voice cracked, just slightly, right at the edge. "There are clients on the line, Cassian. There are people's jobs. I know. I built the system that runs every one of those contracts. You'll get it back when we have an agreement." She asked to meet in person 2 days later. Not a lawyer's office, not yet. A conference room at a business center in the financial district, neutral ground, gray walls, a table too big for 2 people. I got there first. She walked in 11 minutes late, and for the first time since the tarmac, we were standing in the same room. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen on her in years. Not glamorous exhausted, the kind she wore well in front of clients. "Actually tired. How long have you known?" she asked, before either of us had even sat down. "About clear path. A few weeks. And you waited. I wanted to see if you'd tell me yourself." I pulled out a chair, didn't sit yet. "You didn't." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the table instead of at me. "I handled this wrong," she said finally. "All of it. The buyout, the meetings you weren't in, Renata bringing in clear path behind your back. I told myself it was business. I told myself it was necessary for the deal. But I knew what it would look like if you found out. I think some part of me just hoped you wouldn't. I built that company's spine for 3 years, Helena. For free, because I loved you and I believed we were building something together. And the second it became valuable enough to matter, I became a liability to manage instead of a partner to include." She flinched at that, actually flinched, and for a second the composure she'd walked in with cracked all the way open. "I know," she said, and her voice wasn't controlled anymore. "I know that's what it looks like. I don't have a version of this where I come out looking like someone who didn't do that to you, because I did. I didn't say anything right away. Some part of me, the part that still remembered a Sunday drive across the Golden Gate Bridge with her feet on the dashboard, wanted to tell her it was fine, that we could figure it out, that 11 years didn't just end over a folder on a kitchen island. But that wasn't why I was in that room. I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here because I need this to be fair." Finally, the next 12 days were handled almost entirely through counsel. My attorney, Douglas Fairweather, methodical and unhurried in a way that made Helena's legal team visibly uncomfortable, laid out 3 requirements. Formal, documented credit for my authorship of the platform across every record tied to the acquisition. An independent appraisal of the IP's actual value, not a number pulled from a drawer. And an 18-month consulting agreement, because even ClearPath's unfinished rebuild still depended on architecture only I fully understood. The appraisal came back at $4.3 million. Nexus countered at 3.8. We landed at 4.1, plus the consulting agreement, plus the attribution documentation Helena's team had spent months trying to avoid putting in writing. We signed in that same gray conference room, 2 weeks almost to the day after the Tarmac. Helena signed first. When it was my turn, I felt Douglas watching me the way you watch something that could still go sideways, but it didn't. I signed my name where it belonged, on a document that finally, legally, said what should have been obvious for 3 years. That the system running underneath her company had always had my name attached to it, whether anyone said it out loud or not. Helena reached across the table afterward, not for a handshake, just to touch my hand briefly, the way she used to. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I am sorry. I know, I said. And for the first time since that morning on the Tarmac, I actually meant it when I said it back to her. I moved out of the Pacific Heights house the week after the settlement was signed. Not dramatically, not with anger. I packed the way I do everything, methodically, without excess, 3 boxes of clothes and a duffel of cables and hard drives that represented, in some strange way, more of my actual life's work than anything else in that house ever had. Helena wasn't there when I left. We'd agreed it would be easier that way, and it was. Mostly, except for the 10 minutes I stood in the office that used to be a guest room, looking at the desk where I'd sat that night finding ClearPath's timeline, and felt something close but not quite to grief. I moved into a furnished apartment in the Mission. Small, clean lines, a kitchen I still haven't fully unpacked. We're separated now, not divorced, though that conversation is ongoing in the careful, exhausting way these things go when 2 people who once loved each other are trying to be fair to one another on the way out. 6 weeks after I moved out, I ran into Todd at a coffee place on Valencia Street. He was getting a cold brew, and he did that thing people do when they see you after everything's happened. That half-second hesitation, deciding whether it's safe to be normal with you. I waved him over. The Nexus deal closed last week, he told me, once we'd gotten past the small talk. Renata got a very nice package on her way out. Tiffany got promoted. He paused. Helena's good, working hard. I think he chose the words carefully, thinking about things differently than she used to. She asks about you, he added. Not in a weird way. Just, she asks. I thanked him and let him get back to his morning. It's a Sunday now, the kind of San Francisco morning where the fog sits low enough over the Mission that the whole neighborhood feels like it belongs only to the people awake before 10. I have my coffee. I have my laptop open on the kitchen table, working through the early architecture for a new client, a healthcare data firm in South San Francisco with a genuinely interesting integration problem. Nothing to do with Luminary, nothing to do with anyone's name but my own on the invoice. I think about the version of me who sat in that convention center 11 years ago, cold coffee going colder, explaining back-end infrastructure to a woman who looked at him like he'd solved something nobody else in the room even knew was broken. That man believed, completely, that doing the work quietly was its own kind of proof. That the platform speaks for the person who built it, that value doesn't need a name attached to be real. He wasn't wrong about the value. He was wrong about the silence. Somewhere in a server room in Seattle right now, the system I built is still running exactly the way I designed it, moving client data and reports and invoices for people who will never once think about the architecture underneath their screens, the way you never think about the water until it stops running. That used to be enough for me. Being the reason something worked, invisibly, forever. It isn't anymore, not because the work matters less, because I finally understand that the work was never the thing that needed my name on it. I did.